Hi everyone, welcome back to MUS119. Today we're going to get into our last module, Module 6D, and the topic is Cadences, that's a rap. So first, what is a cadence? A cadence is a musical punctuation mark which signals the end of a phrase or section. A cadence creates a sense of closure or continuation. So if you've heard something like this, well, if you hear something like that in a song, you will know that it has come to an end, right? So that's the example of a cadence. Usually we look at the last two chords of a phrase. So it doesn't really matter what happens in the music in the beginning. We only look at the very last two chords. So there are four types of cadences. There's the authentic cadence, plagal, deceptive, and half. So let's start with authentic cadence. Authentic cadence is actually what you just heard in the example, and that is a 5 chord going to a 1 chord, right? If we're in C major, if we play all of the chords, it will sound like, and then we take the 5 chord and 1, and if you redistribute it, it will be, is a sense of finality in it. There is a sense of this huge relief, right? Coming from 5, which is this chord with a lot of tension, especially if you add a 7th to it, which adds the note F. So G, B, D, F. And if we redistribute it, you can have this. Sounds like, the big show has finished, right? So that is called the authentic cadence. But there are actually two types of authentic cadence. There's the perfect authentic cadence, PAC, and there's also the imperfect authentic cadence, IAC. So what's the difference between them? Well, for a PAC, both chords are in root positions. So we're dealing with just two chords, right? The 5 chord and the 1. And if the chord is root position, that means the 5 chord in the key of C major would have C, D, F, G in the bass, right? So that has to be the lowest note. So it will be something like, so you can hear very clearly. So that's one part. And the other part is that the melody has to end on the tonic. So the tonic is the first scale degree of the key, right? If we're in C major, then C is the tonic. So that is the Do. So you can have, so you hear that melody, Do in the melody, and in the bass it's So that is the perfect authentic cadence. But what about imperfect authentic cadence? Well, for imperfect IAC, the melody ends on the 3rd or the 5th of the tonic chord. So the tonic chord here is the C major chord, and C major chord contains the notes C, E, and G. So instead of ending on a C, it's going to end on E or G. So let me play the example. So the melody is basically instead of Do. So you can hear the difference when you hear Do at the very end. It sounds like it has really come to an end. And if we go to the other notes, like the 3rd or the 5th, it can still sound like it's ending, but it doesn't feel that complete. So that's why it's called imperfect. So that's the melody part, but also in the bass, in the lowest notes, if we have a chord, one of the chords is not in root position, we also consider it as the imperfect authentic cadence. So that would be something like, let's say, right? I'm actually still playing the 5 to 1 progression, but it just doesn't sound like it has really finished. So that is another example for imperfect authentic cadence. Okay. Now, the next one is called the plagal cadence. And plagal basically comes from, I would say it's related to the church, right? And this is 4 going to 1. So once again, in C major, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We take this 4 chord and going back to the 1 chord, okay? And if we redistribute it, it will be something like, and that is actually the Amen cadence. If you have attended church, at the end of the prayer, we say Amen, and when you sing it, you actually would have this progression, 4 going to 1. So if you listen to classical music and if you notice that a piece of music comes to an end, and instead of doing the 5 to 1, the authentic cadence, if the composer chooses to use 4 to 1, then that means that there is something he wants to express about his connection with God, or all the church. So it's quite interesting when you listen to a lot of classical music. You start to hear these little references, and so this is plagal cadence. It's still sounds final, but it's not really like shouting, okay, here's the end, but it's more like peace be with you kind of cadence. Okay, so we've talked about 2 types of cadences, the authentic cadence and the plagal cadence. So next we have what's called the deceptive cadence. Deceptive, well, you can see it in the name of it, right? It's going to deceive you. So it's the example given here is a 5 going to a 6. Well, a 5 usually is supposed to go back to 1, right? That's what we expect. But then if the composer intentionally tries to, deceive you, it will be 5 to 6. And there is this sense of sadness, this unexpected turn of events. So we're not really limited to just 5 to 6. It could also be other chords, but the most common one is 5 going to 6. And of course, in the context of a major key, it's going to be a major 5 chord going to a minor 6. But we can also be in a minor key, for example. This is in C minor, and we have these chords. From the 5 chord to major 6. That also works, right? Instead of, that sounds like the end, but instead of that we have, so that is the example of a deceptive cadence. 5, instead of going to 1, it goes somewhere else. Okay. Well, actually, before moving on, I do want to just play in context so that you can really hear the effect of it. So let's take Happy Birthday for example. So Happy Birthday. That's the version that we know. Now instead of having the authentic cadence, we're going to throw in a deceptive cadence. So instead of going from 5 to 1, which is 5 to 1, instead of this, we're going to do something different. We're going to have 5 to 6. Now, you can tell that the music has to somehow continue, right? Because it went somewhere else instead of going home. So usually composers would do that. Let me just play it one more time and then continue and end the song. So at some point, it does have to come back to 1. So this is deceptive cadence, and we have one more type of cadence, which is the half cadence. So the half cadence is the musical cliffhanger, right? Imagine you're watching a TV show where the hero is, you know, hanging from a ledge, and then the screen just fades to black, and you really need to see or hear what happens next, and that's what happens in a half cadence. For example, if I just end the song like that, it will make you feel really, really frustrated because you really want the end. So a half cadence is any type of cadence that, you know, comes to the 5 chord and just stays there. And, you can have that usually in the middle of a phrase where the composer wants to continue the music and not really end it. But there are instances where composers will intentionally end the piece on the 5 chord because the intention is for people to feel that, hey, the piece is not done. And that is exactly what he wants to express. So if at the end of a phrase, the last chord you see is a 5, then that is a half cadence. So there are 4 types of cadences. We have the authentic and plagal, and then deceptive and half. So pay attention to the color coding here. Authentic and plagal, these are what's called conclusive cadences, which means they do come to an end, right? 5 coming to a 1, or 4 coming to a 1. But then the deceptive cadences, it doesn't sound complete, it has to continue. Or the half cadence, because you really want that resolution. So just remember, authentic and plagal are conclusive, and deceptive and half are inconclusive. So when you're doing your assignments, please also pay attention to whether the key is major or minor, because whether you write the chord as uppercase or lowercase, that really depends on the type of chord that you're dealing with, on the quality of the chord. So make sure that you're paying attention to whether the key is indicated in uppercase or lowercase, because that will tell you whether it's major or minor. All right, so let's actually look at an exercise. This is taken, I believe, from one of your assignments. So we're in C minor. C minor. So the first thing to do is, of course, to have a separate sheet of paper and you write out all of the chords. Well, I kind of forgot to do that in the slides, so I'll just use maybe this little corner. But one thing for sure is that you will have to know your roots, right? C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, and then B and C, because we're using the harmonic minor here. So if you are familiar with minor keys and the triads and 7th chords in the minor key, then we would know that 1 is going to be minor, and 4 is going to be minor, and the other ones like D and B, which is the diminished chords here, it's going to be diminished 2 or diminished 7. And then for E flat, that's a third, that's major, this is major, this is also major, and then we come back to 1. Now this is only for triads, and we know that 2, 5, and 7, these chords can be 7th chords. So for D, this is actually a half diminished 7. So that's optional. We're not always going to have that, but if it does happen to be a 7th chord, then it will be a half diminished 7. And for the 7 diminished chord. If it's a seventh chord, which means it has 4 notes, that will be a fully diminished 7. Okay, so if you forgot about this part, please go back and do the reading and go to the part that explains about the chords in a minor key. All right, so the next step is to write the notes out, to write them out in close position. So what we have here, well, I think it doesn't hurt to actually write out all of the letter names, especially if music is new to you. I would never skip this step because I think even for myself sometimes it's very helpful to just see it in something that we're familiar with. So in this case, we have C, E flat, C, G. That means we can write this as C, E flat, and G. Next chord, F, D, A flat. You can have F, A flat, and then D. Well, this one is going to be not in root position for sure. Now, the next one, we have G, B, G, D. So that's basically G, B, and D. And the last one is, of course, C, E flat, and G. Good. So C, E flat, G, the bass is C. Well, that means it's a 1 chord. And the next one, F, D, A flat, F. Well, this, you can see that it's, we have a floating pancake. So we have to rearrange it so that we can find out the root of the chord. So if we bring the D back down, it's actually going to give us a perfect stack of pancakes. D, F, and A flat, right? So the root is going to be D. So D means this is going to be a 2 chord. And because there are only 3 notes, it's going to be a diminished chord and not a diminished 7 chord. So we can have this. But is it complete? Well, if the actual chord that was written here happened to be in root position, then that would have been the answer. But in this case, because it's inverted, right? It's inverted. This is actually a first inversion. So a first inversion means that the third of the chord is in the bass, right? So this is the root, the D. The next one, that's the third, and then we have the fifth. So because the third happens to be the bass note, this is going to be a first inversion, and first inversion is going to be indicated by this number 6. So just so that you remember, for triads, the inversion symbols are, if it's root position, then it's just the chord. Let's say it's 1. If it's first inversion, it's 1 6. If it's second inversion, it's 1 6 4. And for seventh chords, let's take 2 as an example. It'll be a 2 7 or a 2 6 5. That's first inversion. Second inversion is 2 4 3, and the third inversion 4 2. So please remember the nothing, 6 6 4, and then 7 6 5 4 3 4 2. So if you remember that, it will be a lot easier. So let's look at the next 2 chords here. We have G, right? G as the bass. So G is the 5 chord, and we have 3 notes. That means it is a triad. So that is simple. It's just 5. And the last one, C, E flat, G. It's just a 1 chord. So now we have to look at the last 2 chords of this phrase. Well, before that, let's just listen to how this sounds. Okay, so what we have here is 5 going to 1. That is authentic cadence, right? That's authentic cadence. So you can just write authentic. Normally, you would be asked to identify whether it's perfect authentic cadence or imperfect. And in this case, because instead of going back to the tonic C, right? Instead of going back to C, we're going to E flat, which is the third of the chord. That means this is actually an imperfect authentic cadence. This is I, A, C. But if you're in the class for Music 119, you don't really have to include that. even though it's really, really good to know. Okay, moving on to the next one. So the next one is E major, right? So E major, we have 4 sharps. And the sharps, if you remember, the fat cats go down and eat birds, right? That's the order of sharps. So fat cats go down. Let's first write out all of the letter names in E major. So we have E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, and then we have C sharp and D sharp. Back to E. And then if it's a major key, then we, by this point, I think you should already know which chords are always going to be major, which is 1, 4, and 5. And then minor is going to be 2, 3, and 6. And the 7th one is, of course, always diminished, right? And this is in the case of triads. But what if we have 7 chords? 2, 7, or 5, 7, or in this case, 7 half diminished 7. Really important. I would say 9 out of 10 students would forget that the 7th chord in a major key is going to be half diminished 7 if it happens to have 4 notes. Okay, so if we have this, I think we can start to work on the close position. So what we have here, once again, I like to write out all of the letter names because I think that makes things a lot easier. We have a C sharp. So when you write the letter names, also try to include the accidentals, because it's really easy to forget about the accidental. And when you use like a piano keyboard layout to work, on the chords, it can be very confusing if you don't write them in. So in this case, we have all of the letter names. The next step is to, of course, to rearrange it in terms of close position chord. So we have E and E, B, E, G sharp. So we can just write E, G sharp, and B. And the next one is C sharp, E, and A. So here we have a floating pancake. That means this is going to be an inverted chord. Next one, A, C sharp, E, A. A, C sharp, E. A is just repeated. And the last one, E, G sharp, and B. That's it. Okay, so here we have the root E. The next one, well, this has to be reshuffled so that we can find the root. So if we bring the top note A down, we will get A, C sharp, and E. So the root here, the root of the chord is actually A. That's the root. Very important. Now, if it's A, well, actually, let's come back to it. The next one, the root is A. The last one, the root is E. Good. Now we can find out what chords they actually are. So the very first one, E. So that's going to be this guy, right? E, that's a major 1 chord. And the next one, first is inverted. And we change it to this. A, C sharp, E. So A means that's this one, that's a 4 chord, but it is inverted. This is actually a first inversion because the third of the chord is now the root. Sorry, it's now the bass. So this is going to be a 4, 6. And then the last one, the third one is an A chord. It's just a normal 4 without any inversions. And the last one, E, G sharp, B, of course, that's 1. So in this case, what we have is a 4 chord going to 1. So 4 going to 1, that is plagal. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. There are 2 other types of cadences that we are not seeing in these exercises, but I trust that you'll be able to figure them out. Just please make sure that you're paying attention to the inversions, because sometimes you just want to finish the assignment fast, and once you have let's say the very first note here, which is like C sharp, and if you just go and write pancakes, well, that's not going to work because you're going to miss at least one note. Okay, so please make sure that you write out all of the letter names. I have to re-emphasize it every time because it's so important. Okay, so if you have any questions, please email me or set up a time with me for office hours. And I hope you all the very best with your final exam preparation and your review. And once again, if you have any questions, please reach out anytime. All right, take care, everyone.